The process behavior chart will tell us if we've significantly changed that metric or if it's just fluctuating. So I think that's one of the key applications to lean daily management, is to have less daily overreaction.
Today, I'm excited to welcome Mark Graban back to the show. Now, Mark's been on the show several times, and rather than rattle off all the episodes, I'm going to make Jessica earn her paycheck today and look them all up on our show notes page, and she'll link those on the show notes for this particular episode, and definitely would encourage you to go back and check out all of our past episodes. But today, Mark and I talk about his new book, Measures of Success. In particular, we talk all about process behavior charts. We talk about how process behavior charts, sometimes known as control charts, can be used within the confines of lean daily management and strategy deployment and a few other areas within kind of the lean world. So really fun chat with Mark. If you want to learn more about the book, go to measuresofsuccessbook.com. And again, we'll have everything linked up in the show notes. This is episode 250, so it's a pretty big number, and couldn't have picked a better guest to have on for a big milestone like episode 250. So show notes for this one can be found over at gembapodcast.com. Again, just look for episode 250. Okay, enough from me. Let's get to the show. All right, Mark, welcome back to the show. How's it going?
Hi, Ron. I'm doing well. It's good to be back. Thanks.
Yeah. So, well, you've been on, God, I should have looked it up exactly, many times. I will have already mentioned in the intro all the various episodes that you've been on over the years. So pretty sure if you're not number one, you got to be real close to number one for a number of times on the podcast. So thanks for coming on again.
Well, sure. Do I get a special jacket like the 5-time hosts on SNL?
Yeah, no. Maybe. I don't know. We can work something out, I guess. Yeah, you just have the honor, Mark. How's that?
I appreciate it. I don't need the jacket.
No, it's all good. All right. Well, hey, really excited to have you back on. We haven't talked for quite a while, which is a pity considering we live so close to each other. So we have to have a personal improvement project to improve that. But,
yeah, I agree.
But so you've written a new book, and I want to kind of get into that and talk about just process behavior charts and why we lean thinkers really need to be thinking this way and using this tool. Before that, Mark, just in case folks haven't listened to the previous episodes, just tell us a little bit about who you are, your background, how you first came to learn about all this continuous improvement stuff, and then what you're up to these days.
Yeah, it's probably a 25-year story now since I was first introduced to lean concepts as an undergrad. I was thankful that I'm thankful now still that I was exposed to the work and ideas of W. Edwards Deming. So I read the book Out of the Crisis. My dad had exposure to Dr. Deming through his career at General Motors. So I had these parallel introductions to just-in-time, lean, Toyota production system, whatever terms we were using over time, and the Deming philosophy. And Deming was very influential on Toyota, and I've tried to combine some of those different methods and concepts through the work that I would generally frame as lean. I worked in manufacturing for about 10 years. I've been focused primarily on healthcare since 2005. And when you start looking at management practices, continuous improvement practices, metrics at different levels, I've seen a lot of similarities and patterns across different industries, which maybe it's not surprising because big organizations tend to have similar dynamics. And I've been able to practice process behavior charts in conjunction with lean, and long story, 25-year story short, that's what led to writing this new book now.
Yeah. So, all right. So the book is called Measures of Success: React Less, Lead Better, Improve More. And congratulations! Number one bestseller, right? And what is it? The Total Quality Management section of Amazon.
Yeah, and who would know there was still a section labeled TQM on Amazon. So yeah, whenever you see the phrase bestseller, you have to take it with a grain of salt. So the disclaimer is yes, it has at times been number one in that category, which, it's funny. That's the catch-all category for books about Lean and Six Sigma and other topics. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome though, man. Yeah. Congratulations. Thanks. So, all right. Well, okay. So I guess what I want to get into is I don't want to, try never to assume anything on the podcast with a wide variety of folks, from folks that have been at this for quite some time and folks that are just getting started. So tell us, first of all, what is a process behavior chart?
Yeah. So, a process behavior chart is a term, the credit for that term, for that phrase, goes to Don Wheeler, who's got a PhD in statistics. He was a student of Dr. Deming's. He's the author of a number of books, including a book called Understanding Variation, a book that's been really influential to me in my work. And a process behavior chart, in other words, it's a variation or it's a form of control chart. Statistical process control chart. More specifically, for those who know, it's sometimes called an XMR chart. It's where X is the data that you're plotting, the MR is the moving ranges between the points as a way of estimating variation within the measure. But it's a method. I mean, it's a form of control chart that is particularly applicable to metrics, whether that's daily metrics on the front line, on a huddle board or a team board. It's really applicable in the context of strategy deployment if we're looking at monthly or perhaps weekly metrics. So if you try to visualize it as, if you're just using Excel, you create a line chart, or you might call that a run chart. That's the starting point. And then, as with the control chart, we add a line for the average. We add upper and lower, you could call them control limits, or again, the Wheeler phrase would be to call them natural process limits. I think, there's, a discussion could be had about whether the word control is the right one. A process behavior chart is a chart that illustrates the behavior of the process. So I think that's a good phrase.
No, I think it's a really interesting conversation because I've thought a lot about it. I remember when I saw the book first come out, I was like, yeah, okay, process behavior chart, yeah, and I knew it was obviously Wheeler's influence there, but I kind of like it because it's one of my things that I've struggled with, even within the kind of the more traditional Six Sigma approach. The last part of the methodology is C, control, and I've long said you can't really ever control anything. It's either going up or it's going down. It's getting better or it's getting worse. And so I having that idea that we're going to sustain the gains. No, you're really either going to get better or you're going to get worse.
I've long suggested, for what it's worth, and I don't have a deep background in Six Sigma, is that the C could stand for continuously improve.
Yes.
Even though I guess that's a CI. It would be
I
DMAIC E.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. If I could have had that say, I would have. So, all right. Well, let's talk a little bit about again, most of the folks listening to this podcast are probably within the lean movement of some way or another. So I want to kind of talk about three different areas that we often encounter within the lean world. I want to talk about lean daily management. I want to talk about strategy deployment, Hoshinkanri, as some people might call it, and then more of a kind of a A3 type problem solving, A3 thinking, whatever you want to call it. But let's start with lean daily management. You kind of talked a little bit already about metrics and whatnot, but where can we, arguably, should we be using process behavior charts within the confines of lean daily management?
I'll say yes. I think yes. I've seen them be incredibly helpful, whether they're hand-drawn or whether they're done in Excel or some form of software. Because I think the problem statement. I want to make sure we'll apply some A3 thinking here. I'm not just pushing a solution called process behavior charts. Some of the problems that I've seen are if people are just posting a daily metric, like literally hand-drawn on a board, and that metric is quite often compared against a goal or a target. And there might be red-green color coding. There might be I've seen smiley faces and frowny faces magnets. That comparison of a single data point to a goal really doesn't tell us a whole lot. And then if we, say, well, green is good, red is bad, and then the next day we erase the data point and we put another one up there, it creates, I think, either this tension or it creates wasted motion, where sometimes the leaders say, well, anytime we have a day that's red, that's unacceptable, and you need to identify the root cause of that red day. Mm-hmm. And when we take the data over time and plot a process behavior chart, we might start seeing very visually that, well, you know what, the data point is just fluctuating around an average. Yeah. And the same process or the same system will sometimes generate better performance, worse performance. And when we overreact to the red, green, above average, below average, you could argue that that's a form of wasted motion when we ask people to go explain or investigate. And that's time that distracts us, or it sucks up time that we could be using for real systemic improvement, which that would be an application of A3 thinking. So being less reactive and more systematic when we look at a metric that's not performing where we need it to be. We too often are reacting to the noise in the metric instead of looking for signals. And process behavior charts very visually make it apparent, when is it just fluctuating somewhat randomly or predictably? And when is there a signal that something has changed, whether that's good or bad, whether it's something we need to then react to and look for a root cause, or is it proving a hypothesis, or is it, it's serving as a hypothesis test? We tried to make a change. The process behavior chart will tell us if we've significantly changed that metric or if it's just fluctuating. So, I think that's one of the key applications to lean daily management, is to have less daily overreaction.
Now, what about something that I actually personally struggled with and want to get your opinion on? Is, let's say you're tracking some metric, maybe it's like a sales metric, and let's say that you're in a successful company and sales, just kind of continually grow a little, they get better, and it's a good thing. So it's definitely trending upwards. How do you go about using process behavior charts in those scenarios where it's kind of a clear trend upwards? And you know what I'm saying? What would you say there?
Yeah. So there are times where you have metrics that are just fluctuating around a flat average. There are times, like you said, where it's fluctuating around a linear increase. There are cases, we use process behavior charts at KaiNexus, which is a startup / high growing small software company.
You guys ain't a startup anymore, Mark. Come on.
Yeah, it's been around too long to be a startup. But marketing and sales metrics, like the number of leads, is increasing.
Yep.
So you can apply the math, and the setup is a little more difficult, but you think of the same thing if you sort of tilt the process behavior chart, and the same thinking applies. If they're to help avoid overreacting to every variation around that linear trend, because sales are not going to increase the same amount every day or every week or every month. So the chart might be at a 30-degree angle, but the same thinking still applies.
I like it. Yeah, that's good. All right. What about just one more technical question, because I know we got a lot of technical folks out there. What and I know you cover this in the book, so people need to read the book to get the great detail of it. But talk a little bit about when it's appropriate to reset our limits about the mean.
Yeah, generally, you would reset or shift the average and the limits based on, there being a significant change to the system. So there's, different signals, any data point above or below the upper or lower limits is a signal of a significant change to the system. But from that one data point, we don't know yet, is that just an anomaly, or is that the beginning of a shift in performance? So one of the other rules that we use to look for signals is to look for 8 or more consecutive data points above or below the average. So in practice, that's one of the things I really start looking for. If we have been fluctuating around an old average, Now we've got 8 points that are higher, and now it appears to be fluctuating around a higher average. Then you might say, okay, well, sure, let's go ahead and calculate some new limits. We'll calculate a new average. But I think the other thing to make sure we understand is not just the manipulation of the chart, but the connection between the chart and what's happening in our systems or our processes. So if it looks like there's been a shift in the metric, hopefully we know what changed, so that we have a fighting chance of sustaining that change if it's in a positive direction. If it's a shift in a bad direction, maybe, I think this is good advice going back to Wheeler. He says, well, if the shift is in a bad direction, don't redraw the chart, go improve the system and either get it back to where it had been before or make it better. So I think there are some short practical tips. Sometimes people make the mistake of continually recalculating the average and limits. Those aren't calculated as essentially a moving average. We generally establish a baseline period where if we have a predictable system in that baseline period, we then continue those limits over time until we see one of our signals that something has changed.
Yeah, no, exactly. Now, last question on the lean daily management side. What is your take on? Well, obviously daily, so it would be good for some of these metrics to have at least a daily point. But what is it ever appropriate to do it more frequently than daily? Should we, like hourly, or what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think it depends partly on what's the cost and difficulty of tracking the metrics more frequently. I mean, I think a lot of us have worked in an environment where we do hour by hour charts, whether that's on a production line or in a clinic. We're tracking some number on an hourly basis. And the beauty of process behavior charts and the way we calculate the limits, an hour to hour metric is generally going to have more inherent or routine variation hour to hour. So the limits then tend to be wider than if we were rolling everything up to a daily metric, where some of that variation almost always gets smoothed out. So if we're looking at it hourly or looking at it daily, the same mindset and rules apply. We want to we don't want to overreact to an hourly metric any more than we would want to overreact to a daily metric. And the methodology for how we calculate these limits is pretty robust for those different applications. If we have the hourly data readily available and we can chart it on paper or on a whiteboard or something, then doing that hourly is key, as long as we don't overreact to the noise.
Got it. Okay, so let's transition now to strategy deployment. Sometimes you might call it Hoshin Connery, whatever you want to call it, but kind of strategic. Where do you see process behavior charts working there?
Well, I mean, I think there's an important role, as we're looking at strategy deployment metrics. Generally, those are metrics that leaders have said need to improve. We don't want it just fluctuating around an average. If we were doing nothing as an organization to improve the system, it's probably going to fluctuate around an average. And we've probably set some goal for the year. We're going to have strategic initiatives or projects that are intended to shift performance, to close a gap between typical performance and the goal. So I think process behavior charts help us do a better job with our cause and effect analysis of we've made a change. Let's see if there's a significant and or sustained shift in the metric. I visited a hospital about a month ago, and they had an important strategic high-level metric for the organization up on projected on screen. And the one limitation is that there were only 4 data points, which makes it hard to really gauge. Generally we would want maybe 15 data points to establish a good baseline on the process behavior chart. But what they were explaining verbally, and they had a run chart on the screen, that there were 2 data points. And they said, oh, well, we did this initiative and we made a big impact on the metric, and it had blipped a little bit. And then they said, oh, but we're having trouble sustaining. And then, of course, the fourth data point had kind of blipped back to where it was before. And so, if all we're doing is comparing, well, this data point's better than the last, and then this data point's worse than the last, that could be within the realm of fluctuation. And again, it's tough with 4 data points, but I mean, I think the way I would look at that chart, I would question, and I would hope the organization would question, well, was that really a quote unquote big impact or not? We can affect a metric. Let's say, well, it changed 20% from last month. Well, without the context of all the other data points, maybe it normally fluctuates 25 or 30% from month to month. So there are cases, whether it's evaluating projects or evaluating initiatives, whether it's again at the frontline lean daily management level or at the strategy deployment level. We don't want to fool ourselves inadvertently of saying, well, we did this project, we want to prove that it was successful when the chart, when the voice of the process might imply, well, I don't know if we really had a significant impact. That's a difficult conversation to have. I think it requires, some humility and some analytical rigor to make sure it's not just hopes and dreams of improvement that we can, if we say, well, we implemented it and we didn't sustain it, we're drawing the conclusion that the initiative was successful and we need to just keep at it, when maybe the initiative didn't really have any impact and the metric is still just fluctuating. We'd want to go back and try something else. The process behavior chart is an important part of those PDCA or PDSA cycles to better evaluate if we're moving in the right direction or if it's just fluctuating.
Yeah, you mentioned voice of the process there, and something that I've seen over the years, folks kind of sometimes get a little confused on is the difference between the voice of the process and then what we would call the voice of the customer. So the customer may give us some specification limits, right? In other words, don't go above or below this, or we have a defect. But I've seen people get confused between, let's say, specification limits and upper and lower control limits, or so talk a little bit about the difference there and how to keep that straight.
The same thing can happen. You've got let's say you've got a goal on the process behavior chart, and then you're looking at your upper and lower limits and your average. And so let's say we've got a metric. Try to visualize a metric where the 0 is the ultimate best, so lower is better. And we might have a goal. Think of a hospital metric. The goal is this, as bad as this sounds to say, 3 falls per month. So, well, ultimately the goal is 0, but let's say we're aiming for 50% improvement this year. Okay, the goal's at 3. It's fluctuating around an average of 7 currently, and the lower limit of the chart is calculated to be 2. And the upper limit then, would be 12. Within the realm of that fluctuation, we might occasionally randomly be at or better than the intermediate goal of 3. The metric might fluctuate from 8 to 4 to 2, and then, or let's say, so it might be better than the goal.
Yeah.
But it's still within the realm of random fluctuation. So we want to be careful of not overreacting to that one data point and say, oh, we've hit the goal. We're now always going to hit the goal. That may or may not be true. And I think we would want to drive improvement activities that would, starting point might be 8 consecutive data points below the old average. That would show, all right, we're taking it in that direction towards 0. The limits would be recalculated. Maybe the limits are narrower. So I think, there's this difference between viewing a metric as just individual data points where we say hooray or oh no, versus viewing a metric as saying, well, it produces this average and it's fluctuating around an average. We need to bring the average down, or we need to improve the average, which is it requires a different level of evidence than saying, look at that one data point, problem solved. People sometimes draw linear trend lines in Excel that can be misleading. I think we just want to make sure that we're using charts in a way that doesn't mislead us from that organizational cause and effect analysis between what we're doing and the impact we're having on the metric. And this is hard to talk about verbally.
Yeah, I know.
Having a whiteboard or a slide showing a chart. Hopefully that's helpful for people, or that makes sense. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, no, totally. So, all right. Well, what about so the last one was kind of more of a A3 problem solving, or is it? So talk about kind of how the two interact with one another.
Yeah, so I think when we're using process behavior charts, if we have a metric, it's been fluctuating around an average and it's fluctuating within our limits, we may see a data point that is, you could call it an outlier or a signal. You have a data point outside those limits. Mm-hmm. That's a point where we absolutely should say, okay, time out. That's a signal that something has changed. As a team or as an organization, we should make sure we understand what changed. Was it an intentional change that somebody made, or is it just something that happened? Like, there's a time and a place for kind of reactive root cause analysis. Something changed. Let's figure out what it is. But when a metric is just fluctuating around an average and within those limits, again, like, organizations make the mistake of overreacting to every point that's worse than average, or demanding an explanation, or, you're looking for a root cause that by definition isn't there. The system isn't changing significantly. There's nothing to point to.
Yeah.
So when we have that case when a system's just fluctuating around an average and we don't like where that average is, that's where we could sort of maybe, take a breath, step back and do an A3 that's more systematic about understanding, why is the system performing and fluctuating the way it is today? Mm-hmm. What do we think we could do to improve that system? Let's implement or test a change, and let's use the process behavior chart to then see if we're really making a statistically meaningful change to the metric or not. That's one way I would sort of connect. Mm-hmm. Or the process behavior chart is a filter. When there's a signal, that's a time to be reactive. When it's just noise, don't react to the noise. But if you need to improve the system, then work on that in a more systematic way through an A3 or through a DMAIC framework or whatever your organization is comfortable with.
Yeah. Now, one of the stories in your book that I really appreciated, mainly because I got a blog too, or Gamba Academy does. You talked about you had a signal, and but you weren't necessarily able to put your finger on why.
Right.
So talk about that. Like, how often does that sort of thing occur in the real world?
Yeah, it happens a lot where there could be some external factor that changed. Not surprisingly, I have a process behavior chart that looks at daily book sales for measures of success. I also look at a weekly roll up, and there's less variation week to week. But either way, I'm looking to see typically the number of sales. It just fluctuates around an average. Mm-hmm. And if I were to do things to try to help get the word out about the book, like being on your podcast, mm-hmm. Thanks again, Ron, or writing blog posts or articles about it, I would look to see if there's a signal. And kind of like you mentioned with blog, Google Analytics data, or looking at the sales chart from Amazon, like there was one signal where I looked and said, well, that was the day, that was the official launch day. So like the number of pre-orders was lower, and then I think there were probably a lot of people waiting. They didn't want to pre-order it. I made the announcement the book's available. There was a spike in sales, but it was a temporary effect, mm-hmm. right? So I think I understood what happened, but then sales went back and fluctuated around an average that was higher than the pre-order average, but it's fluctuating. Mm-hmm. That one data point, I couldn't say, sales are going to be high like that every day. That hypothesis would have turned out to be untrue. But there are other days where there's been one or two data points above the limit. I say, a signal, and I have no idea what was different, because different marketing activities may or may not have an effect. It could be as simple as a person in an organization read the book and liked it and told everyone on their team, 12 people all went and bought a copy.
Yeah.
And now that's a signal mm-hmm. On the chart. It could be something that's the result of something I did, or it could be just happening and I have no control over it. So the thing in general with process behavior charts, the signal on the chart will tell you something changed. It doesn't tell you what changed.
Yeah.
That's where you need knowledge of your system. You need to go to the Gemba. You need to investigate.
Yeah.
But reacting to signals instead of reacting to the noise, like when we stop reacting to the noise, that becomes a huge time saver. And thankfully, I've had people who've read the book. I don't care about the sales numbers. I want the book to make a difference. And people have emailed or called and talked with their stories about we're not wasting time reacting to noise anymore.
Yeah.
And we can actually do more A3s, and we're actually moving the needle on our metrics. Like that's the impact that this methodology can have.
Yeah. No, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Good stuff. So, if someone's listening to this right now, aside from going out, and we need to create a signal here. So everybody needs to go buy measures of success. So, talk to someone who's interested and willing to read and willing to learn about the tool itself. But how would you advise them to kind of get started with the tool?
Yeah, I mean, the book, lays out how to do that. It lays out different examples of, I think the most important thing for most people is how to use the charts, like as a consumer of the charts. There's an appendix that goes through the detail of how to do the calculations. It's not complicated. There's some of that how-to detail in the book. Don Wheeler's book, Understanding Variation, goes through that method. And I didn't write my book to try to replace Wheeler's. Hopefully it's additive, where I think some of the connections I make to Lean are a little more direct. And I was thrilled Dr. Wheeler wrote the foreword for my book. But I think those two books, I've got a number of webinars out there, one that KaiNexus published, one that there's a couple other webinars out there. So that gives the visual of here's what the charts look like instead of me trying to just explain them into your ears. But
I guess what I was getting at, Mark, is more about, like, do you have some specific advice? Like, let's assume they can create it, they'll pull down the templates that you provide or whatever, and they can do it, they just got to, but where do you think they should start? Should it be like a daily metric, or should it be something within? I don't know. Do you have any suggestions?
So yeah, that's a really good question. So you have to think about organizational acceptance of a new method. So I try to frame in the book. Here's the problem statement. Here are the situations we would be better off avoiding. Here is a method that helps solve some of those problems. Some of the people who have read my book have had the authority, or they're empowered to go and apply these methods within their team or at a higher level in the organization. Some people, unfortunately, have read the book, got really excited, ran to their boss and said, I've got this new method. And you know what? The boss doesn't see the problem in the current condition. So now we're getting into the realm of psychology and motivation and change management. People generally don't care about solutions if they don't think there's a problem. The reacting to noise, demanding explanations, that feels good because it feels like you're doing something as a manager or as an executive. So, I think one of the lessons from, broader systems thinking is, about how difficult it is to first unlearn the way you've been taught to manage. And most people haven't been exposed to control charts or process behavior charts. That's where I've said in my career, getting exposed to Deming's work and Wheeler's work, it's both the best thing and the worst thing that's ever happened. Because now you look at a chart, like, I don't believe your linear trend line, and everyone's looking at you like you're crazy because there's the linear trend line. That says, well, look, it's getting better. And if we just give it enough time, it's eventually going to hit zero. And I'm like, well, it looks like it's just fluctuating around an average. That's what the process behavior chart view says. So, there are a lot of leaders who are used to putting up, grids of numbers, red, green color coding, that, like, right there, helping people see how process behavior charts are better is tough. So there's times where I've encouraged people, even if you can do some sort of pilot, or try it somewhere, or do the process behavior charts in parallel to the so-called bowling charts and the tables of numbers, and try to expose a leader to a different way where hopefully they look and say, well, you know what, that chart is a lot more visual.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I
And
like that.
does a job of detecting if there's a trend. And, I think that's kind of the concern is that, and I was guilty of this earlier in my career. I kind of talk about that in the book a little bit, where you get all excited and you try to teach people the method, and then they just blink at you and say, but we're comfortable with the way we're managing today.
Mm-hmm.
Like, all right, well, that was all a waste of time. And it's not even so much about like was I convincing or compelling or not. I think it comes back to that old change challenge of, if people are comfortable with the status quo, they might not be interested in a different method. That happens sometimes with lean, more generally, right?
Yeah, exactly. Good stuff. All right. So measuresofsuccessbook.com. Is that the best place to go, Mark, to learn more about the book?
That's the official book website. People can download a sample chapter. There's kind of some case studies and spreadsheet templates, information out there. As we record this in early going on mid-December, it's currently only available as an ebook. I'm working with a company that is doing the page typesetting to turn it into a paperback book, and that'll be available early 2019.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, well, actually, this episode is going to be released. I don't have the exact date. It's going to be in January, so who knows? Maybe we'll update the show notes accordingly when it comes out. But
I would encourage people check. The book website lists the different ways you can order it. I mean, today, or it'll always be available through the Amazon Kindle store. It's available through Apple Books. I had pull from some customers who wanted it that way, and then it's also available through a platform called LeanPub. Which gives you different ebook formats, including a PDF. Mm-hmm. And so there are different ways. Somebody who really wants the book on paper, printing a PDF at home or in your office is not the most cost-effective way to create a paper book, but we're going to have the actual professionally produced paperback book hopefully sooner than later.
Well, you got some nice praise from couple pretty prolific authors themselves, Eric Ries and Dan Pink, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I was real excited about that. And, knock on wood, at least as we're talking now, I think all of the reviews on Amazon have been 5-star reviews. Yeah. And again, that if you use an Eric Ries term, the number of books sold or the star rating, that might be a quote unquote vanity metric, as Eric Ries calls it. I'm just thrilled, to hear examples where people are putting the book to good use.
He may say that, but I promise you, he still checks out his reviews every once in a while.
we all have some level of vanity,
that's right? Come on. Yeah, it's all right. Yeah, well, great job, Mark. I'm so glad that you wrote it, and congratulations on all your success. And so what's the next book? You got one in work?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I'm saying it's funny. This is the first book I've written that's not a quote unquote healthcare book, and it's not a quote unquote lean book. So I don't know. I think if I write something again, I'll make sure there's not 100+ charts, because that creates a typesetting challenge. An ebook, it's funny. Ebook formatting doesn't matter as much because the idea of a page isn't there. But anyway, for now, I'm still focused on getting this book out. I think the ideas, there are other Deming ideas related to lean that are really fascinating to me. Like the idea of, I don't have answers to this, but how can you try to break an organization of its habit of blaming individuals for systemic problems? A theme like that, I think, is connected to lean management and process behavior charts. Those are things I'm interested about, because those go across industries. It's particularly sad in healthcare, but it's sad in any environment where individuals get blamed for things that are maybe not their fault as individuals.
Right. Exactly. Good stuff. All right. Measuresofsuccessbook.com. We'll link to this, everything in the show notes. This will be, gembapodcast.com. This will be episode 250. So go check that out. Mark, what's the best way for folks to connect with you other than, I guess, that website? There's a contact button
Yeah,
there.
I mean, I'm so easy to reach and find online. People can email me, mark@markgraban.com. You can find me on LinkedIn or Twitter or wherever, but that's the best email address, mark@markgraban.com.
Yeah, and Graban is Graban for those
Correct.
only listening. So good stuff. All right, Mark. Well, hey, yeah, it's going to be Christmas here before too long, so hope have a nice holidays and all the rest of it. By the time people listen to this, it'll be like, it's already gone and passed. But we live in the present here. So.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Ron. Thanks for having me on. I hope you and your family have a Merry Christmas.
Yeah, likewise. All right, you take care, Mark.
All right. Thanks, Ron. You too.
Thanks for listening to the Gemba Academy podcast. Now, we invite you to take a no-strings-attached, fully functional test drive of GembaAcademy.com. Gain immediate access to more than 1,000 Lean and Six Sigma learning resources, all free of charge, at GembaAcademy.com.